The surface of Lake Tahoe was like a sheet of hammered silver under the early morning sun. Margaret, Maggie to her friends, though she had precious few of those left after decades of relentless work, stood on the wraparound cedar deck of her newly purchased home, letting the crisp, pine-scented Nevada air fill her lungs. For the first time in 35 years, she wasn't rushing. There was no blaring alarm clock at 4:30 a.m., no frantic checking of overnight market reports, no putting out fires for the logistics software company she had built from nothing but a dining room table and a second mortgage. She took a sip of her black coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The mug in her hands was a heavy, handmade ceramic piece she'd bought at a local artisan market just yesterday. It was a small, seemingly insignificant purchase, but to Maggie, it was a profound luxury. For 3 decades, her life had been a blur of disposable paper cups and lukewarm break-room coffee. Now, at 62 years old, having just sold her company for a clean, undisputed $4 million, she finally owned her time. The house was everything she had dreamed of during those brutal, 18-hour workdays. It was a sprawling 4,000-square-foot sanctuary of glass, natural stone, and weathered wood, perched on a secluded inlet of the lake. The master suite upstairs featured floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel as though you were floating directly over the water. She had spent exactly 2 nights in that magnificent king-sized bed, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves. It was the silence she loved most. It was a hard-won silence. Her mind, however, occasionally betrayed her peace, drifting back to the ghost of her late husband, Richard. Even now, 10 years after a sudden heart attack had taken him, his voice sometimes echoed in her head. Richard had been a man who believed a woman's ambition was a temporary, cute little hobby, right up until it threatened his ego. When she first started the software company, he had laughed. "You don't know the first thing about corporate finance, Maggie," he used to say, his tone dripping with that familiar, patronizing warmth. "You're a mother. Leave the heavy lifting to the men before you bankrupt us." But Maggie hadn't bankrupted them. When Richard died, leaving behind a mountain of hidden credit card debt and a second family he had secretly been funding in Reno, it was Maggie's little hobby that saved her and their son, Tyler. She had swallowed her grief, locked her heart inside a steel vault, and worked until her knuckles ached and her vision blurred. She had missed Tyler's high school baseball games. She had missed parent-teacher conferences. She had paid for his Ivy League tuition, his first car, and the down payment on his pristine suburban home, all with the silent, agonizing guilt of a mother who felt she was buying her son's forgiveness for her absence. Maggie took a deep breath, pushing Richard's ghost back into the dark corners of her mind. That was the past. Tyler was 34 now, a handsome, ostensibly successful man with a beautiful wife, Jessica. Maggie had bought this massive house with them in mind. She envisioned holidays here, Thanksgiving dinners at the massive oak dining table, Christmases with a towering tree in the great room, maybe even grandchildren running barefoot across the heated floors. She wanted to give them the warmth she had been too exhausted to provide when Tyler was a boy. The absolute tranquility of the morning was suddenly shattered by the aggressive crunch of heavy tires on the long gravel driveway. Maggie frowned, setting her coffee mug on the cedar railing. She wasn't expecting any deliveries. The property was gated, which meant whoever was coming had the access code. From around the bend of the towering evergreen trees, a massive gleaming black Cadillac Escalade appeared, followed closely by a sleek Range Rover and a third, slightly battered minivan. The vehicles came to a halt in her circular driveway, doors flying open almost simultaneously before the engines had even been cut off. The silence of Lake Tahoe vanished, replaced by the chaotic, piercing sounds of a dozen people. Children she didn't recognize were already shouting, running across her freshly manicured lawn. Car trunks popped open, revealing mountains of designer luggage, oversized coolers, and inflatable pool toys. And there, stepping out of the driver's side of the Escalade, was her son. Tyler looked effortlessly polished in his designer linen shirt and expensive sunglasses, possessing the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from a lifetime of being told you are the center of the universe. From the passenger side emerged Jessica, her daughter-in-law, already holding her smartphone up to film her surroundings. Jessica was a woman who lived her entire life for an unseen audience on the internet, her face frozen in an expression of perpetual, curated enthusiasm. Maggie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She hurried through the living room and opened the heavy mahogany front door. "Tyler, what on earth is going on?" Maggie asked, her voice tight with confusion as she stepped onto the front porch. Tyler jogged up the stone steps, a brilliant, charismatic smile plastered across his face. He threw his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace that smelled of expensive cologne and artificial charm. "Surprise, Mom!" he practically shouted, stepping back and holding her by the shoulders. "Happy retirement!" Maggie blinked, overwhelmed. Behind him, Jessica was directing traffic like a drill sergeant. "Careful with that bag, Kevin. It's Louis Vuitton. Don't put it on the dirt. Mom, Dad, the guest house is over there, but I think we should take the main floor." Jessica's parents, her brother Kevin, his loud chewing gum snapping girlfriend, and a chaotic assortment of nieces and nephews were swarming the property like locusts. "Tyler, sweetheart, I don't understand," Maggie stammered, her heart fluttering with a mix of anxiety and a desperate rising hope. "There are so many people. You didn't tell me you were coming." Tyler's smile softened into something that looked remarkably like genuine affection. He reached out and gently took her hands. "Mom, listen to me. I know we haven't been as close as we should be. I know how hard you worked your entire life. You sacrificed everything for me. When you told me you finally sold the company and bought this place, I felt terrible." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat. She stared up at her tall, handsome son, the boy she had broken her back to provide for. "Terrible? Why?" "Because you were out here all alone," Tyler said softly, his thumbs rubbing the arthritic joints of her hands. "You spent 30 years taking care of everyone else. I wanted to take care of you. Jessica and I called her whole family. We organized this massive surprise retirement vacation just for you. We're going to cook for you, clean for you, and celebrate the incredible woman you are. You deserve a house full of life, Mom, not an empty museum." The knot in Maggie's stomach instantly dissolved, replaced by a warm, overwhelming flood of emotion. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. "He sees it," she thought, a profound sense of relief washing over her. "He finally understands what I did for him." All the guilt she had carried for being a working mother, all the time she had worried that Tyler resented her, it all vanished in the warmth of his words. This was the payoff. This was the love she had been waiting for. "Oh, Tyler," she whispered, pulling him back into a hug, burying her face in his shoulder to hide her tears. That is so incredibly thoughtful. Thank you, honey." "Of course, Mom," Tyler murmured, patting her back. "We just want you to relax." In fact, he pulled back, giving her a slightly apologetic, boyish grin. "Jessica's parents are getting up there in years, and her dad has a bad knee. The stairs are going to be tough for him, and with the kids running around, we were hoping, just for this week, if you wouldn't mind taking the smaller guest suite down by the garage. We thought Jessica and I could take the master upstairs to keep an eye on the kids, and her parents could take the main floor bedrooms." Maggie hesitated. A tiny, rational voice in the back of her mind whispered that she had only slept in her beautiful master suite for 2 nights, that the guest room by the garage was dark, cramped, and smelled faintly of paint. But she looked at Tyler's hopeful face, and the emotional high of his earlier words completely drowned out her hesitation. A mother's love, she had long ago realized, was often just a series of willing concessions. You give up your body, your sleep, your peace, and eventually you give up your bedroom. But it felt worth it, because for the first time in his adult life, her son was here to celebrate her. "Of course, sweetheart," Maggie smiled, blinking away the last of her tears. "It's no problem at all. I'll pack up my things right now. You just tell everyone to make themselves at home." "You're the best, Mom!" Tyler kissed her cheek and immediately spun around, his voice booming across the driveway. "All right, guys, bring it all in. We've got the master suite upstairs." The rest of the day was a grueling endurance test disguised as a family gathering. Maggie found herself entirely displaced in her own home. The peaceful sanctuary she had curated was systematically dismantled. Jessica immediately rearranged the living room furniture to create a better vibe for her Instagram photos, shoving Maggie's expensive antique armchair into a corner to make room for a ring light. Jessica's mother, a loudly opinionated woman named Brenda, took over the kitchen, complaining relentlessly about Maggie's lack of organic, gluten-free pantry staples. "Margaret, dear, how do you live without a proper espresso machine?" Brenda hollered from the kitchen as Maggie hauled her own heavy suitcase down the stairs toward the garage. "And there's no almond milk. Tyler said you'd have the place fully stocked." "I'll go to the store later, Brenda," Maggie called back politely, her back aching from carrying the luggage. Nobody had offered to help her move her things. By 9 p.m., Maggie was exhausted. Her head throbbed from the constant screaming of the children and the blaring bass of the music Tyler had set up by the patio. She retreated to the small, windowless guest room near the garage. It was cold down here, far from the heated floors of the main house. She sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, rubbing her aching temples. Despite the chaos, she tried to cling to the warmth of Tyler's words from the morning. "He did this for me. He wants to celebrate me." She repeated it like a mantra, trying to force down the bubbling resentment that threatened to ruin her mood. She was just being a grumpy old woman, she told herself. She needed to learn how to share her space. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Maggie finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to wake up an hour later with a parched throat. The house was finally dead silent. She slipped out of bed, pulling her thick cashmere robe tightly around her shoulders to ward off the chill of the lower level, and padded softly up the wooden stairs in her bare feet to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As she reached the top of the stairs, the moonlight spilling through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the great room. She moved silently toward the kitchen island, careful not to wake anyone. That was when she heard it. A low, muffled voice coming from the outdoor patio. The sliding glass door was cracked open just an inch, allowing the cool night breeze and the sound of the conversation to drift inside. Maggie froze, her hand hovering over a water glass. It was Tyler. He was pacing on the deck, a cigar glowing faintly in the darkness, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, Dave, listen to me. The property is an absolute gold mine," Tyler was saying, his voice stripped of all the boyish charm he had used on her that morning. It was sharp, calculating, and ruthless, exactly like his father's. It's prime Lake Tahoe waterfront, 4,000 square feet. The comps in this specific inlet are pulling in 10 to 15 grand a week during peak summer season. Maggie's breath hitched in her throat. She stepped closer to the cracked door, pressing her back against the cool plaster of the wall, perfectly hidden in the shadows. "I know my company needs the collateral, Dave. That's why I'm out here," Tyler continued, letting out a frustrated sigh. "The Series B funding is drying up. If I don't show the investors some heavy, tangible assets on the books by the end of the month, the whole luxury rental portfolio goes belly up. I've got creditors breathing down my neck." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. Maggie felt a deep, icy dread begin to spread from her chest outward, freezing the blood in her veins. "Of course I can get the deed," Tyler laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that made Maggie physically flinch. "It's my mother. She's completely desperate for my attention. You should have seen her this morning. I gave her a hug, fed her some crap about a retirement party, and she was practically weeping. She packed her own bags and moved into the basement so Jessica's family could take the main house. She's a pushover, Dave." The silence in the kitchen was absolute, save for the frantic, hammering rhythm of Maggie's own heart. "Look, she's old, she's lonely, and she's out of her depth," Tyler said, taking a drag of his cigar. "She doesn't know what to do with a place this big. I've already talked to my lawyer. Once I get my name on the deed as a co-owner, which she'll sign the second I tell her it's for estate tax purposes, I can use her equity to secure the commercial loan. If she puts up a fight, please, I'll just tell her she's losing her memory and needs supervision. She's terrified of ending up alone. She'll do whatever I say. Just get the LLC paperwork ready on your end." Tyler ended the call. In the shadows of her own kitchen, Margaret Sullivan stood paralyzed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. There was no surprise party. There was no celebration of her life's work. There was no loving son trying to make up for lost time. It was all a calculated, predatory acquisition. Her son, the boy she had starved for, the boy she had bled for, the boy she had protected from his father's cruelty, viewed her not as a mother, but as an easy mark, an obstacle, a foolish, lonely old woman sitting on a pile of equity that he felt entitled to steal. He was his father's son, through and through. The profound, agonizing heartbreak lasted for exactly 60 seconds. Maggie closed her eyes, and a tear, hot and bitter, slipped down her cheek, dropping onto the collar of her robe. She mourned the son she thought she had. She mourned the family she had dreamed of building in this house. But when Maggie opened her eyes again, the tears had stopped. The desperate, hopeful mother who had carried her own suitcase into a dark basement was gone. In her place stood the woman who had clawed her way to the top of a male-dominated tech industry, the woman who had ruthlessly crushed competitors, negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, and stared down men far more intimidating than Tyler Sullivan. The chill in the air didn't bother her anymore. The ice had entered her soul. Maggie turned away from the sliding glass door and walked silently back down the stairs to the basement room. She didn't go back to bed. Instead, she flipped on the small desk lamp, pulled her encrypted business laptop from her leather briefcase, and opened it. The glow of the screen illuminated a face that was no longer soft and accommodating, but set in stone. If Tyler wanted to treat her like a business transaction, she was happy to oblige. And he was about to learn a very painful lesson. In the world of corporate warfare, Margaret Sullivan had never lost a hostile takeover. The glowing screen of the laptop was the only light in the cramped basement room. For 3 hours before dawn, Maggie didn't move, her fingers flying silently across the keyboard. She didn't need a private investigator yet. 30 years of conducting corporate due diligence had taught her exactly where to look for buried financial skeletons. By 6 a.m., the picture on her screen was crystal clear, and it was devastating. Tyler's company, luxury rental company, DES wasn't just struggling, it was in a financial death spiral. He had over-leveraged his initial seed money, taking out massive high-interest loans to acquire luxury properties that were currently sitting empty. His corporate accounts were bleeding cash, and his personal credit cards were maxed out. He was exactly 3 weeks away from defaulting on a commercial balloon payment. If he missed it, the banks would seize everything, including the pristine suburban home Maggie had helped him put the down payment on. He didn't just want her house for prestige. He was a desperate man backed into a corner, and like a drowning victim, he was perfectly willing to push his own mother underwater to keep himself afloat. Maggie closed the laptop with a soft, decisive click. She tucked it safely beneath the false bottom of her heavy leather briefcase. When she finally walked upstairs, the sun was fully up, and the nightmare of her new reality was in full swing. The great room looked as though it had been ransacked by a frat house. Wet towels were draped over her antique velvet sofa, ruining the upholstery. Empty beer bottles and half-eaten plates of pizza crusts littered the custom oak dining table. From the patio, the screeching laughter of Jessica's nieces and nephews pierced the morning air as they fired water guns at the floor-to-ceiling windows, leaving muddy streaks across the glass. In the center of the kitchen, Brenda, Jessica's mother, was furiously banging pots and pans. "Well, it's about time, Margaret," Brenda snapped without turning around, her voice grating like sandpaper. "The kids have been starving since 7, and I couldn't find your waffle maker. Do you seriously not own a Belgian waffle maker? Tyler said this kitchen was state-of-the-art." Maggie took a slow, deep breath, channeling the ironclad patience she used to reserve for hostile board meetings. She had to play the part. She had to be the tired, overwhelmed, slightly confused elderly woman Tyler believed her to be. "I'm sorry, Brenda," Maggie said, forcing her voice to sound smaller, more fragile than usual. "I haven't fully unpacked yet. I'll just make some toast." "Toast isn't going to cut it for growing boys," Brenda scoffed, aggressively whisking a bowl of eggs. "Just run to the store, and don't forget the organic almond milk this time. Kevin's girlfriend is practically breaking out in hives from regular dairy." Maggie didn't argue. She turned on her heel and walked toward the hallway console table where she always, without fail, kept her belongings. She needed to get out of this house for an hour just to breathe. She reached for her small leather purse to grab her car keys. They weren't there. Maggie frowned. She patted the surface of the table. She checked the small drawer. Nothing. A prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She was a woman of fastidious habits. Everything had a place. Her keys were always on the left corner of the console table. "Looking for something, Mom?" Maggie turned to see Jessica floating down the sweeping wooden staircase, wearing a silk designer robe and holding a steaming mug of matcha. Her phone was, as always, clutched in her other hand, the camera lens pointed strategically toward her own face. "My car keys," Maggie said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "I left them right here on the table last night." Jessica paused her recording, offering Maggie a look of exaggerated, theatrical pity. It was the kind of look one gives a lost toddler. "Oh, Maggie, are you sure? You were so exhausted last night. You seemed really scattered. Maybe you left them in your jacket." "I didn't wear a jacket yesterday," Maggie replied evenly. "And my blood pressure medication was right next to the keys. It's gone too." Jessica's eyes widened and she gasped softly, laying a manicured hand over her chest. "Your heart medication? Oh my God, Maggie, that's really dangerous. You can't just lose things like that. Are you feeling okay? You look a little flushed. Are you having memory gaps again? Again? Maggie thought, the icy dread from the night before returning with a vengeance. She had never had a memory gap in her life. She possessed a mind like a steel trap. But looking into Jessica's wide, perfectly made-up eyes, Maggie realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't carelessness. This was a coordinated, deliberate campaign of gaslighting. They were setting the stage. They were creating a narrative of senility. I'm perfectly fine, Jessica, Maggie said, her tone dropping a fraction of an octave, hinting at the CEO beneath the grandmotherly facade. I know exactly where I put my things. Mom, what's going on? Tyler appeared from the hallway, dressed in tailored golf clothes, looking the picture of the concerned, responsible patriarch. He walked over and wrapped a protective arm around Jessica's waist, looking at Maggie with deeply furrowed brows. Maggie lost her car keys and her heart medication, babe, Jessica said, leaning into her husband. Her voice dripped with fake anxiety. I'm really worried. She doesn't even remember where she put them. She's been so confused since we got here. I am not confused, Maggie said, her hands balling into fists at her sides. She looked directly at her son. Tyler, tell your wife to stop speaking about me as if I'm not in the room. I want my keys and I want my medication. Now. Tyler sighed, a heavy, patronizing sound. He stepped forward and placed his hands on Maggie's shoulders, staring down at her with a look of profound, calculated sorrow. Mom, calm down. You're getting hysterical. Your heart rate is probably through the roof right now because you skipped your pills. We'll find them. But Jessica is right. You've been slipping lately. You forgot to stock the fridge. You packed up your own room last night without making sense. It's okay. We're here to help you. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his lies almost knocked Maggie off her feet. He was looking her dead in the eye, weaponizing her own kindness from the night before, twisting her sacrifice into a symptom of dementia. By mid-afternoon, the house had descended into total anarchy. Kevin and his girlfriend had dragged Maggie's expensive patio furniture onto the lawn to sunbathe, leaving deep gouges in the grass. The children had somehow managed to shatter a crystal vase in the foyer. Brenda was screaming at someone on the phone about a delayed grocery delivery. Maggie sat in the kitchen, sipping a glass of tap water, watching the destruction of her dream home unfold. She hadn't found her keys. She hadn't found her medication. The mild headache she had woken up with had bloomed into a pounding migraine. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the great room, followed by the sound of tearing fabric. Maggie sprang up from her stool and rushed into the living room. Jessica's 6-year-old nephew was standing on the back of her antique velvet sofa, holding a broken piece of the cedar window blind he had just ripped from the wall. It was the perfect moment. The stage was set for her to finally snap. Enough, Maggie bellowed. Her voice, trained to command rooms full of aggressive male executives, sliced through the noise of the house like a whip. The entire family froze. Brenda dropped her phone. The child on the sofa burst into tears. This is my house, Maggie shouted, stepping into the center of the room, letting her genuine rage bleed into her performance. I have worked my entire life to buy this sanctuary, and in 24 hours you have treated it, and me, like absolute garbage. You are destroying my property. You are hiding my belongings. I want every single one of you to pack your bags and get out of my house immediately. The silence was deafening. Jessica looked genuinely shocked, stepping back behind the kitchen island. For a brief, glorious second, Maggie felt like she was back in control. But then Tyler stepped forward. He didn't look angry. He looked triumphant. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. Kevin, Brenda, Tyler said calmly, not taking his eyes off his mother. Take the kids outside. Jessica, go upstairs. Give my mother and me a moment. The family scurried out like frightened mice, leaving Maggie and Tyler alone in the trashed living room. The air between them was thick and suffocating. Tyler walked slowly toward her, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. He stopped a few feet away, his expression hardening into something cold, clinical, and utterly ruthless. The charismatic son was gone. Richard Sullivan's ghost was standing in her living room. You really shouldn't have yelled like that, Mom, Tyler said, his voice a low, threatening murmur. It just proves what Jessica and I have been saying. You're emotionally unstable. You're paranoid. Accusing us of hiding your things? Screaming at children? It's classic early-onset dementia. Don't you dare play this game with me, Tyler, Maggie hissed, her chest heaving. I know what you're doing. I heard you on the phone last night. I know about your debt. I know you want my equity. but you will never get it. Now get out." Tyler didn't even flinch at being caught. Instead, a slow, terrifying smirk spread across his face. He reached inside his tailored blazer and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the ruined velvet sofa. "You're not kicking anyone out, Mom," Tyler said smoothly, "because you're not well. And as your only son, it's my legal and moral responsibility to step in when you can no longer care for yourself." Maggie stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "It's a general power of attorney, along with an advanced healthcare directive," Tyler explained, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "It gives me full legal authority to manage your finances, your real estate, and your medical decisions. I had my lawyers draft it last week." Maggie let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You think I'm going to sign that? Are you out of your mind?" Tyler took a step closer, towering over her. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Dad always said you were too emotional to handle big money," Tyler said softly, driving the knife directly into her deepest, oldest wound. "He told me before he died. He said, 'Tyler, your mother is a worker bee. She can build things, but she doesn't know how to protect them. She's weak. When the time comes, you have to take the reins or she'll lose it all.'" The words hit Maggie like physical blows. It was as if Richard had reached out from the grave and wrapped his hands around her throat. All those years of protecting Tyler from the truth about his father, the cheating, the debt, the verbal abuse, had backfired. Tyler idolized a monster, and now he had become one. "Your father was a coward and a thief," Maggie spat, tears of pure fury finally springing to her eyes. "I saved this family. I gave you everything." "And now you're losing your mind," Tyler countered smoothly, his voice rising in volume, performing for anyone who might be listening outside the windows. "You're hiding your own medication. You're losing your keys. You're hallucinating phone conversations. Mom, you are a danger to yourself." He picked up the envelope and pulled out the legal documents, slamming them down on the glass coffee table along with a silver pen. "Sign it," Tyler commanded. "No," Tyler sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if he were the victim of an exhausting burden. "Mom, don't make me do this the hard way. If you don't sign this right now, I am going to pick up my phone and call Adult Protective Services. I will tell them you are off your medication, experiencing severe paranoia, and exhibiting violent outbursts around minors." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, horrified. "They will come out here," Tyler continued, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "They will evaluate you. And with Jessica, Brenda, and Kevin all serving as witnesses to your erratic behavior over the last 48 hours, they will place you under a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold. They will lock you in a ward, Mom, and while you're in there, a judge will grant me emergency conservatorship anyway. But if you do it that way, you'll never see the inside of this house again. I'll move you straight into an assisted living facility, a locked memory care unit." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was a flawlessly evil trap. He had the witnesses. He had the missing medication. He had the narrative. To the outside world, he was the loving son trying to protect his deteriorating mother. For the first time in 30 years, Maggie felt truly, deeply terrified. And then, the heartbreak finally overtook the anger. The dam broke. Maggie collapsed onto the edge of the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Deep, racking sobs tore through her chest. She wept for the boy she had raised, the boy who was now completely, irrevocably dead to her. She wept for the sacrifices she had made that had purchased nothing but her own destruction. "Please, Tyler," she sobbed, her voice muffled by her hands, trembling violently. "Please don't do this to me. I'm your mother. I love you." Tyler stood over her, his shadow falling across her trembling shoulders. He didn't reach out to comfort her. He didn't flinch. "Sign the papers, Mom. It's for your own good." Maggie kept her face hidden, letting her shoulders shake with theatrical devastation. The tears were real, but the surrender was not. Beneath the veil of her hands, her eyes were dry, wide open, and burning with the cold, calculating fire of a woman who had just been handed the exact weapon she needed to destroy her enemy. She let the silence stretch, letting him savor his victory, letting him believe he had completely broken her spirit. Finally, with shaking hands, she reached out and picked up the silver pen. She didn't read the document. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what it was. She pressed the pen to the signature line. Her legal name, the name on her birth certificate, her driver's license, the deed to the house, and all her corporate accounts, was Margaret Ann Sullivan. With a trembling, seemingly erratic hand, she scrawled a signature across the bottom line. Margaret Rose Sullivan. It was a flawless execution. The handwriting was hers, but the name was legally invalid for any document requiring identity verification against her Social Security number or existing banking profiles. To a bank teller, it was a fraud trigger. To Tyler, blinded by his own arrogance and greed, it was just a messy signature from a weeping, defeated old woman. She dropped the pen. It clattered against the glass table. Without looking at him, without saying another word, Maggie stood up. She kept her head bowed, her shoulders slumped in total defeat, and walked slowly, unsteadily toward the basement stairs. Behind her, she heard the crisp rustle of paper as Tyler snatched up the document. "Good choice, Mom," he called after her, his voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction. "I'll take care of everything from here." Maggie closed the basement door behind her, the click of the latch echoing in the stairwell. As she descended into the darkness of her cramped room, she wiped the last tear from her cheek. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up her encrypted email server. Tyler thought he had won the war. He didn't realize he had just given her the formal declaration she needed to burn his entire world to the ground. The basement guest room was no longer a place of exile. It had become a war room. As soon as the heavy wooden door clicked shut, Maggie's posture straightened. The trembling in her hands vanished, replaced by the steady, absolute stillness of a predator waiting in the tall grass. She opened her encrypted email server and began typing. She didn't write to a therapist, and she didn't write to a friend. She wrote to Chloe Mitchell. Chloe was a 60-something corporate attorney who wore tailored Chanel suits like suits of armor. She was ruthless, brilliant, and possessed a deep personal hatred for men who underestimated women. She had overseen the sale of Maggie's company, tearing the buyer's legal team to shreds over the fine print. Maggie's email was brief, entirely devoid of emotion, and chillingly precise. "Chloe, Tyler is attempting a hostile takeover of my personal assets using a fraudulent power of attorney. He intends to use the Tahoe property to collateralize his failing business. I need you to draft an irrevocable trust immediately. Move the Tahoe deed, my liquid cash, and the investment portfolios into it by tomorrow morning. Name the law firm as the trustee. Lock it down. He cannot touch a single cent. Call me on the secure line at 8 a.m. She hit send. There was no hesitation. An irrevocable trust meant she was legally relinquishing direct ownership of her own millions to a trusted legal entity, making her assets completely untouchable by anyone, including herself, without jumping through massive legal hoops. Most importantly, it rendered Tyler's forged power of attorney instantly worthless. You cannot grant someone authority over assets you technically no longer own. For the next week, Maggie delivered the performance of a lifetime. She emerged from the basement each morning looking disheveled and deeply depressed. She stopped wearing her expensive cashmere sweaters, opting instead for oversized, faded sweatshirts that made her look frail and shrunken. She spoke softly, hesitated before answering simple questions, and occasionally stared blankly out the window. Tyler and Jessica swallowed the act hook, line, and sinker. Convinced they had successfully broken her spirit and secured the keys to the kingdom, they stopped pretending to care. The polite masks slipped completely, revealing the breathtaking entitlement beneath. They treated Maggie's $4 million dream home like an all-inclusive resort where the staff was annoyingly slow. Jessica commandeered Maggie's brand-new SUV, tossing the keys to her brother Kevin so he could take his screaming children to the amusement park. Brenda stopped asking Maggie to cook and simply began leaving crusty, unwashed dishes piled high in the sink, knowing the confused old woman would eventually clean them up out of habit. The worst part wasn't the physical labor or the noise. It was the invisible, suffocating disrespect. Maggie would sit at her own kitchen island, eating a piece of dry toast, while Tyler and Jessica stood 2 feet away, discussing what renovations they were going to make to the house once they officially took over management. "I'm thinking we tear down this wall," Jessica casually mentioned one Tuesday morning, tapping her manicured fingernail against the custom cedar paneling Maggie had specifically chosen. "It blocks the natural light for my morning vlogs, and we should turn the basement into a home theater. Maggie won't need that much space anyway once we move her into the smaller facility." Maggie didn't look up from her toast. She chewed slowly, her face perfectly blank, while her mind filed every word, every insult, every casual cruelty into a heavily guarded mental vault. Keep talking, she thought. Get comfortable. Arrogance is always the loudest before the fall. The inciting incident arrived on Thursday evening. Tyler marched down the basement stairs, not bothering to knock, and pushed Maggie's door open. She quickly minimized the spreadsheet she was reviewing and brought up a game of digital solitaire, looking up with wide, confused eyes. "Mom," Tyler said, his tone brisk and authoritative. "Jessica and I are hosting a major networking event this Saturday. I've invited about 50 people, mostly angel investors, some local real estate developers, and a few minor celebrities Jessica knows. This is the push I need to secure my Series B funding." Maggie blinked, clutching the collar of her oversized sweater. 50 people? Here? Tyler, the house? "The house will be fine," he interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "We've hired a cleaning crew for Sunday. Listen, I need you to make yourself scarce on Saturday night. These are high-level business people. They don't want to see my elderly mother shuffling around in her bathrobe looking confused. Stay in the basement. Read a book." The sheer, unfiltered disrespect of being banished to a basement in her own home, ordered to hide like a shameful family secret, made Maggie's blood run cold. But her expression remained perfectly pathetic. "Okay, Tyler, if you think it's best." "I do," he said, turning to leave before pausing in the doorway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, tossing it onto her desk. "Oh, and tomorrow, take Jessica's minivan to that wholesale club in town. We need appetizers. Get the frozen meatballs, some of those cheap cheese cubes, and maybe some bulk potato chips. And get the cheap boxed wine. No one actually cares what they eat at these things as long as the alcohol is free. Just put it on your card if the 20 doesn't cover it." He didn't wait for an answer. He just walked away, leaving the $20 bill sitting on her keyboard like a physical insult. Serve frozen meatballs to 50 millionaire investors? Serve cheap boxed wine in a $4 million Lake Tahoe estate? Tyler wasn't just cruel. He was a terrible businessman. He was trying to project extreme wealth and success, but his desperate lack of actual funds was going to make him look like a cheap amateur. Maggie stared at the $20 bill. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face in the dim lighting of the basement. If Tyler wanted to host an unforgettable networking event to prove how successful his company was, as his loving mother, it was her absolute duty to help him. She waited until 2 a.m. When the house was dead silent, she opened her laptop and searched for the most exclusive, astronomically expensive catering company in the entire Lake Tahoe region. She found High Sierra Epicurean, a Michelin-starred mobile kitchen that catered exclusively to tech billionaires and Hollywood elites retreating in the mountains. She picked up her burner phone, a prepaid device Chloe had advised her to buy with cash, and dialed the emergency after-hours line. "High Sierra Epicurean," a smooth, professional voice answered. "How can we assist you?" "My name is Margaret," Maggie said, her voice dropping the fragile old woman act and snapping back into the crisp, authoritative cadence of a CEO. "I represent Luxury Rental Company. We are hosting a high-stakes investor gala this Saturday for 50 VIPs at a private waterfront estate. I am aware of your short notice fees, and money is no object. I need your absolute top-tier package." The man on the other end perked up immediately. "Of course, ma'am. We can certainly accommodate. Our platinum package includes a raw oyster bar, beluga caviar stations, a 5 Wagyu beef sliders with shaved black truffles, and our vintage champagne service." "Perfect," Maggie said smoothly. "I also want full uniformed waitstaff, a professional mixologist, and a string quartet. Send me the invoice and the contract." "Excellent choices, ma'am. The total for an expedited premium event of this scale will be $25,000. I'll need a corporate tax ID and an authorized digital signature on the contract to secure the date." "I will provide the corporate details via email," Maggie replied. She hung up the phone and opened her encrypted files. Earlier that week, she had easily bypassed Tyler's weak passwords to access his company's financial records. She pulled up the official employer identification number, EIN, for Luxury Rental Company and entered it into the catering contract. She listed the billing address as Tyler's corporate office in San Francisco. Legally, this was a masterpiece. She wasn't using her own money. She was utilizing the corporate identity Tyler had so proudly bragged about. The only missing piece was his legally binding signature. This was the tricky part. Forging his signature would be illegal, a criminal offense that Tyler's lawyers could use to void the contract and attack her. No, Tyler had to sign the document himself, willingly and digitally. Maggie spent the next hour carefully downloading the DocuSign contract from the caterer onto her iPad. Then she manipulated the viewing settings. She zoomed in perfectly on the final signature box, strategically hiding the massive itemized bill of truffles, caviar, and the terrifying $25,000 total. Above the signature line, in a tiny text box she inserted herself, she typed, "Authorization for wholesale grocery and beverage delivery." The trap was set. Now she just needed the mouse to take the cheese. Friday afternoon was a chaotic whirlwind. The house was in an uproar as Jessica shrieked at her family to clean up their mess, frantically trying to make the house look presentable for her Instagram photos before the investors arrived. Tyler was pacing the patio, sweating through his designer shirt, barking orders into his phone as he tried to manage his collapsing business while preparing to play the wealthy host. He was distracted, stressed, and irritable. He was in the perfect psychological state to be careless. Maggie emerged from the basement wearing a stained apron, her hair intentionally messy. She walked out onto the patio holding her iPad with shaking hands. "Tyler?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to be annoying. Tyler covered the receiver of his phone, glaring at her with barely contained rage. "What, Mom? I'm in the middle of a crisis here. Did you get the meatballs?" I'm trying," Maggie stuttered, looking down at the iPad in confusion. "I ordered the boxed wine and the frozen food from the wholesale delivery app, like you said. But they won't bring in the alcohol unless I have the homeowner or the event organizer sign this digital age verification thing. I don't understand how to use this machine. It keeps asking for a signature." Tyler rolled his eyes so hard Maggie thought they might get stuck in his head. "Jesus Christ, Mom, it's just a touchscreen," he hissed, snatching the iPad from her hands. "You are completely useless with technology. How did you ever run a software company?" Dad was right. Your engineers did all the actual work. Maggie forced herself to look hurt, shrinking back slightly. Inside, her heart was beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. Tyler didn't scroll up. He didn't read the microscopic fine print. He didn't question why a wholesale grocery app looked so formal. He was a stressed, arrogant man who believed his mother was too stupid to formulate a complex thought, let alone a corporate trap. He just saw a signature box, scribbled his name with his index finger, and hit confirm. A green checkmark appeared on the screen. Document completed. "There," Tyler snapped, shoving the iPad back into her chest. "The cheap wine is authorized. Now please go back downstairs. You're giving me a migraine." "Thank you, sweetheart," Maggie whispered meekly. She turned and walked back inside, the iPad clutched tightly to her chest. As soon as she was out of his line of sight, her posture straightened. She tapped the screen, opened her email, and forwarded the legally binding, digitally signed $25,000 catering contract directly to the management team at High Sierra Epicurean. Contract executed, she typed in the body of the email. "See you tomorrow at 5 p.m. That night, the house was buzzing with anticipation. Jessica was upstairs trying on expensive dresses, while Tyler was at the dining table, rehearsing his pitch to the investors. They were both dreaming of the millions they were going to secure, built on the stolen foundation of Maggie's life work. Down in the basement, Maggie sat in the dark, sipping a glass of the tap water they had left her. She didn't need vintage champagne yet. The anticipation was intoxicating enough. Tyler thought he had outsmarted her. He thought he had weaponized the law against an old, confused woman. He thought he was playing chess while she was playing checkers. But Margaret Sullivan wasn't playing a game. She was executing a corporate slaughter. And tomorrow night, in front of 50 of the wealthiest people in the state, Tyler Sullivan was going to learn exactly why his father had been so terrified of her. Saturday arrived with the crisp, golden perfection that only Lake Tahoe could offer. At precisely 3 p.m., a fleet of 5 sleek, unmarked black Mercedes Sprinter vans rolled past the wrought iron gates of the estate. From her small window in the basement, Maggie watched the military-like precision of the High Sierra Epicurean staff. A dozen men and women dressed in immaculate black uniforms with silver name tags poured out of the vehicles. They didn't bring cheap chafing dishes. They brought mobile refrigeration units, custom oak carving stations, and crystal champagne towers. Within an hour, the back patio was transformed into a scene straight out of a billionaire's gala. A string quartet set up beneath the towering cedar trees, tuning their violins. The scent of wood smoke, roasting Wagyu beef, and sea salt began to drift through the open windows, completely overpowering the smell of the stale beer Brenda had spilled on the rug the night before. Upstairs, the reaction was immediate and comical. Maggie could hear the panicked, heavy footsteps of Tyler and Jessica rushing to the windows. "Tyler, what is this?" Jessica's voice drifted down the stairwell, shrill with disbelief. Are those ice sculptures? I thought you said your mother was getting frozen meatballs." I don't know," Tyler stammered. "I told her to use the wholesale app. Maybe she clicked on the wrong thing? Or maybe—" His voice shifted, the confusion morphing seamlessly into his trademark, unearned arrogance. "You know what? She probably felt guilty. She knows she's been a burden all week. She probably drained her checking account to hire a local caterer to make it up to me. Honestly, it's the least she could do." "Well, it looks incredible for an apology," Jessica squealed, already posing for a selfie with the caterers in the background. "This is going to look amazing on my feed. The investors are going to be so impressed." Maggie closed her eyes, a dry, bitter laugh escaping her lips. She probably drained her checking account. He was so blindingly entitled, so completely detached from the reality of money, that he didn't even question how a confused old woman could orchestrate a Michelin star event from an iPad in an hour. He just accepted the luxury as his divine right. By 6 p.m., the estate was swarming with exactly the kind of people Tyler was desperate to impress. Men in tailored linen suits and women in understated designer silk mingled on the deck, sipping Dom Perignon from crystal flutes. True to his word, Tyler had ordered Maggie to stay out of sight. She sat in the dim light of the basement, listening to the muffled sounds of the string quartet playing Vivaldi and the clinking of glasses. Through the floorboards, she could hear Tyler holding court, his voice booming with artificial confidence. "Oh, the catering?" she heard him say to a group of venture capitalists, chuckling smoothly. "Just a little something my company put together. At Luxury Rental Company, we believe that if you're going to host, you spare absolutely no expense. It's all about the experience, gentlemen. And this property? Yes, it's a family asset. Prime equity. We're looking to leverage it to expand our portfolio across the West Coast." He was selling them a ghost. He was building his empire on the foundation of a house he didn't own, using food he couldn't afford, while the mother he was planning to lock in a psych ward sat quietly beneath his feet, holding the detonator. The party lasted until midnight. When the final black town car pulled out of the driveway, the catering staff packed up their equipment with the same silent, terrifying efficiency with which they had arrived. They left the kitchen spotless, taking everything but a single, thick, ivory envelope resting on the center of the marble island. Sunday morning broke with a heavy, suffocating silence. Maggie woke up early, dressed in her oversized, faded sweatshirt, and walked upstairs. The house smelled faintly of expensive cigars and truffles. Jessica's family was passed out in the various bedrooms, exhausted from pretending to be high society. Tyler was standing in the kitchen, still wearing his rumpled dress shirt from the night before. He was staring at the piece of paper in his hands. His face was the color of old ash. "Morning, sweetheart," Maggie said softly, shuffling toward the coffee maker with a slight manufactured tremor in her hands. Was the party nice? Tyler didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the paper, his pupils dilated in pure panic. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. What did you order yesterday?" "Just the appetizers you asked for," she said innocently, pouring a cup of water. "I used that machine you gave me. Did the people bring the cheese cubes?" Tyler's hands began to shake. He slammed the paper down on the marble island. It was the final invoice from High Sierra Epicurean. Total amount due, $25,450. Billed to Luxury Rental Company, corporate tax ID verified. Authorized signature, Tyler Sullivan. Terms, net 15 days. Immediate legal action upon default. $25,000, Tyler choked out, his chest heaving as if the air had been sucked from the room. "Mom, this is a $25,000 catering bill, and it's billed directly to my company. How did you do this?" "I didn't do anything, Tyler," Maggie said, shrinking back against the counter, playing the frightened victim flawlessly. "You were the one who signed the screen. You said I didn't know how to use technology. You grabbed it and signed it." Jessica, wearing a silk sleep mask pushed up into her messy hair, padded into the kitchen. "Babe, what's all the yelling? My head is killing me. We owe 25 grand, Tyler screamed, losing whatever scrap of composure he had left. He shoved the invoice toward his wife. My company is on the hook for $25,000 for a single dinner. The corporate account only has $2,000 in it. If this goes to collections, the Series B investors will see the default on my background check and pull out. We are ruined, Jessica. Jessica's jaw dropped, the blood draining from her perfectly tanned face. Tyler, you said your mom paid for this. You said she was apologizing. She tricked me, Tyler roared, pointing a trembling finger at Maggie. Look at her. She's standing there acting like a confused old bat, but she set me up. Tyler, please, you're scaring me, Maggie whimpered, pulling the oversized sleeves of her sweater over her hands. Shut up, he barked, his face contorted into something ugly and desperate. He began to pace the kitchen like a caged animal. Okay, think. The balloon payment on the house is due on Tuesday. The catering company will sue by Friday. I need cash. I need liquidity right now. His eyes darted around the room before locking onto the hallway console table, where the thick manila envelope containing the power of attorney still sat. The POA, Tyler muttered, his eyes lighting up with a manic, feverish desperation. I have the power of attorney. I have legal control of her assets. He lunged for the envelope, ripping it open to ensure the document was still there. He looked at Maggie, his lips curling into a cruel, triumphant sneer. You thought you were smart, Mom? Ordering a bunch of caviar on my dime? He laughed, a high, unstable sound. It doesn't matter. I have your signature right here. Tomorrow morning, the second the bank opens, I am walking in and taking out a $100,000 home equity line of credit against this house. I'll pay the caterer, I'll pay my corporate debt, and whatever is left, I'm using to put you in a memory care facility where you can't touch an iPad ever again. Tyler, no, please, Maggie begged, letting a single perfect tear slide down her cheek. That's my retirement. You can't. Watch me, he spat. He stormed past her, grabbed his keys, and slammed the front door so hard the glass panes rattled. The moment the door shut, Maggie's tears stopped instantly. She reached up, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and calmly poured her hot water over a high-grade matcha tea bag. Monday morning was a lesson in the brutal, unyielding reality of corporate law. Maggie was sitting on the back deck, dressed no longer in her faded sweatshirt, but in a tailored charcoal gray St. John knit suit. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore her vintage Cartier watch, a gift she had bought herself the day she made her first million. She looked like exactly what she was, a highly successful, terrifyingly competent CEO. At 10:15 a.m., the tires of Tyler's Escalade screeched on the gravel driveway. The car door didn't just open, it was kicked open. Tyler stormed around the side of the house, his tie ripped loose, his face purple with absolute, unadulterated rage. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and was waiting for the smoke to clear. What did you do? He screamed, his voice cracking, echoing across the tranquil waters of the lake. Jessica and Brenda, who had been lounging in the sunroom, rushed out onto the deck, sensing the explosion. Maggie took a slow, elegant sip of her matcha. She didn't stand up. She didn't shrink away. She simply looked at him over the rim of her cup, her eyes chips of Arctic ice. I assume your meeting at the bank did not go well, Tyler? She asked, her voice calm, resonant, and dripping with authority. Margaret Rose Sullivan? Tyler bellowed, waving the power of attorney document in the air like a madman. The bank manager practically laughed me out of his office. He said this signature is legally invalid because it doesn't match any of your state or federal identification. You forged your own name on a legal document. I did no such thing, Maggie replied smoothly, setting her cup down. I simply signed the name of my late grandmother. You were the one who failed to verify the signature of the principal on a legally binding document. A rather embarrassing oversight for a businessman, wouldn't you agree? Jessica gasped, covering her mouth. Maggie, you were faking it? The memory loss? The confusion? Maggie turned her piercing gaze to her daughter-in-law. Jessica, the only thing I've lost this week is my patience for your appalling lack of manners. It doesn't matter, Tyler shouted, spit flying from his lips. He was completely unhinged now, terrified and cornered. The POA was just a shortcut. I'm your only heir. I'll call my lawyer right now. I'll file an emergency injunction to freeze your accounts pending a psychiatric evaluation. You can't hide your money from me. My money? Maggie raised an eyebrow, a cold, predatory smile finally gracing her lips. Tyler, I don't have any money, and I certainly don't own this house. Tyler froze. The frantic energy drained out of him, replaced by a profound, sickening confusion. What are you talking about? I looked up the county records last month. You bought this house for $4 million cash. I did. Maggie nodded. But as of last Wednesday, right around the time I heard you on the patio discussing how easy it would be to institutionalize me and steal my equity, I transferred the deed of this house, along with my entire investment portfolio and all my liquid assets, into an irrevocable trust. The silence on the deck was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. A trust? Tyler whispered, the blood completely leaving his face. The Margaret A. Sullivan Legacy Trust, to be exact, Maggie clarified, her tone conversational but lethal. It is managed by a board of 5 independent corporate attorneys in San Francisco. I am merely a beneficiary with a right of residency. I cannot sell the house. I cannot borrow against it. And most importantly, Tyler, nobody else can either. You cannot attach a lien to it. You cannot use it for collateral. And if you try to sue me for it, you will be suing a billion-dollar law firm that specializes in destroying predatory creditors. Tyler staggered backward, actually hitting the cedar railing of the deck. His knees seemed to buckle. An irrevocable trust was a financial fortress. It was impenetrable. His entire plan, the fake retirement party, the gaslighting, the networking event, had all been for absolutely nothing. He was $25,000 in debt to a Michelin star caterer. His company was days away from default, and the gold mine he thought he was sitting on was completely out of reach. You, Tyler gasped, clutching his chest. You planned this. You let me order the food. You let me sign that iPad. I let you hang yourself with your own rope, Maggie corrected him, her voice hardening to steel. You came into my home under the guise of love, intending to declare me legally incompetent so you could pick my bones clean. You are your father's son, Tyler. Greedy, arrogant, and fundamentally cruel. But unlike your father, you made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. You're a monster, Tyler whispered, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. No, Maggie stood up, smoothing the skirt of her tailored suit. She stood at her full height, radiating the power of a woman who had survived the worst the world had to offer. I am a mother who finally woke up. I spent my entire life working to give you the world, and you rewarded my sacrifice by trying to lock me in a cage. We are done. Tyler's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. The panic vanished, replaced by a desperate, vindictive rage. You think you won? He snarled, pulling his cell phone from his pocket with shaking hands. You think you can just embarrass me and cut me off? I have witnesses. Jessica, Brenda, Kevin, they all saw you acting crazy this week. They saw you lose your meds. I am calling Adult Protective Services and the police right now. I'll tell them you're having a manic episode and you're a danger to yourself. He dialed the numbers frantically, putting the phone to his ear. Hello? Yes. I need emergency psychiatric assistance at the Sullivan estate. My mother is having a severe break from reality. Yes, she's hostile. Please hurry. He hung up, breathing heavily, staring at her with wild, bloodshot eyes. They're coming. They're going to put you in a straitjacket, you miserable old witch. Maggie didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She simply reached down to the glass table, picked up a thick, sleek black leather binder, and held it in her hands. Let them come, Maggie said, her voice a terrifying whisper of absolute calm. 20 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser and a plain white sedan bearing the county seal pulled into the driveway. A uniformed officer and an exhausted-looking social worker carrying a clipboard hurried up the front steps. Tyler ran to meet them at the door, playing the role of the distraught son with Oscar-worthy desperation. Officers, thank God. She's on the back deck. She's been hallucinating, talking about conspiracies, hiding her own heart medication. She needs to be taken to a hospital immediately. The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, approached the back deck cautiously, the officer right behind her. They expected to find a raving, disheveled elderly woman in a state of crisis. Instead, they found Margaret Sullivan sitting elegantly at her patio table, sipping tea in a designer suit, looking more put together than anyone else in the house. Mrs. Sullivan? The social worker asked, clearly confused by the stark contrast between the frantic 911 call and the serene reality. My name is Sarah. Your son called us. He has some severe concerns about your cognitive health and your safety." "I imagine he does." Maggie smiled warmly, gesturing to the empty chairs at the table. "Please sit down, Sarah, officer. I'm so sorry my son dragged you all the way out here on a Monday morning. I assure you, I am in perfect health." "She's lying," Tyler yelled, pacing behind the officer. "Ask her about her heart medication. She lost it 3 days ago and has been off the walls ever since." Maggie calmly opened the black leather binder. She slid a crisp, heavily stamped document across the table toward the social worker. "That is a comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluation," Maggie said clearly. "Conducted this past Friday morning by Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of neurology at Tahoe Forest Hospital. As you can read, I scored in the 99th percentile for cognitive function. I have 0 markers for dementia, Alzheimer's, or any mood disorders." Tyler stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Friday? You were in the basement all day Friday." "I slipped out through the garage while you were busy trying to figure out how to work the espresso machine," Maggie noted dryly. The social worker reviewed the document, her professional skepticism shifting toward Tyler. "This is a very thorough, very recent evaluation, Mr. Sullivan. Your mother appears to be in excellent mental health." "But the medication," Tyler insisted desperately, pointing at Jessica. "Jessica saw her lose it. She's been missing doses." Maggie reached into the binder again. She pulled out a small, black USB drive and placed it gently on the glass table. "I didn't lose my medication, officer," Maggie said, her voice dropping the warmth and turning deadly serious. "When I purchased this estate, I had a state-of-the-art security system installed. It includes hidden, motion-activated cameras in the main living areas." Jessica let out a sharp, choked gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the exterior wall of the house. "On that drive," Maggie continued, locking eyes with her terrified daughter-in-law, "is crystal clear, 4K video footage of Jessica Sullivan taking my prescription blood pressure medication off the console table and throwing it into the kitchen trash compactor. There is also audio footage of my son, Tyler, attempting to extort me, threatening to place me in a locked psychiatric ward if I did not sign a fraudulent power of attorney giving him control of my assets." The officer's hand instinctively dropped to rest on his utility belt. He turned to look at Tyler, his expression hardening into law enforcement mode. "Sir, is this true?" Tyler couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating, staring at the small black USB drive as if it were a live grenade. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had crushed him completely. Before the officer could ask another question, the crunch of gravel announced the arrival of one final vehicle. A sleek silver Mercedes sedan pulled up alongside the police cruiser. The doors opened and Chloe Mitchell stepped out. She was wearing a flawless crimson trench coat and carrying a thick stack of legal files. She walked up the deck stairs with the terrifying confidence of a woman who destroyed lives for a living. "Good morning, Margaret," Chloe said briskly, nodding to the officer. "Gentlemen, I am Chloe Mitchell, Senior Counsel for the Margaret A. Sullivan Legacy Trust." She turned her shark-like gaze onto Tyler, who looked as though he might pass out. "Tyler Sullivan," Chloe announced, her voice ringing out like a judge delivering a sentence. "You are hereby served with a permanent restraining order, barring you from coming within 500 feet of Margaret Sullivan or any property owned by her trust. Furthermore, I have already forwarded the contents of that USB drive to the district attorney's office. We will be pursuing felony charges for elder financial abuse, attempted extortion, and the fraudulent use of a corporate identity to secure catering services." Chloe dropped the massive stack of legal papers directly onto Tyler's chest. He reflexively caught them, his knees finally giving out as he slumped into a patio chair, completely broken. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate these premises," Chloe finished, checking her watch. "If you, your wife, or any of these other individuals are still on this property at 11:30 a.m., this officer will arrest you for trespassing." Maggie sat quietly, watching the empire of her son's arrogance crumble into dust. There was no joy in it, only a profound, heavy exhaustion and the quiet, settling peace of a woman who had finally excised a tumor she had been carrying for 34 years. "You heard my lawyer," Maggie said softly, looking at the strangers who had invaded her home. "Get out." Autumn arrives in Lake Tahoe not with a whisper, but with a breathtaking display of fire. By late October, the towering evergreen trees surrounding the estate were framed by the brilliant gold and crimson of the turning aspens. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. For Maggie, It was the most beautiful season she had ever witnessed. 3 months had passed since the morning the sheriff's cruiser had escorted Tyler and his in-laws off her property. The silence that followed their departure hadn't felt empty. It had felt like a deep, cleansing breath after being held underwater for 34 years. Maggie had hired an interior designer to completely erase any lingering traces of Jessica's vibe. The antique velvet sofa was professionally restored. The great room was now a haven of warm leather, soft cashmere throws, and a massive stone fireplace that crackled merrily on chilly evenings. She had joined a local book club, started taking watercolor painting classes down in the village, and for the first time in her adult life, slept a solid 8 hours every single night. She was healing, but the final chapter of Tyler's consequences had yet to be written. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside a stack of catalogs and utility bills in her wrought iron mailbox. Maggie sat at her custom oak dining table, sipping her morning coffee, and stared at the envelope. It was a cheap, standard white envelope, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Tyler's frantic, heavy scrawl. She didn't feel the familiar spike of anxiety she used to associate with him. Her heart rate remained perfectly steady. She picked up a silver letter opener and sliced the envelope open. There was no greeting, no apology, just the desperate, panicked pleading of a man who had finally hit rock bottom. "Mom," the letter began, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. My lawyer said I shouldn't contact you because of the restraining order, but I have no one else. Jessica filed for divorce. She took the kids to her mother's house in Reno. Luxury rental company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last week. The caterer sued me, the investors backed out, and my corporate accounts were seized." Maggie took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. "But that's not the worst part," the letter continued, the handwriting becoming increasingly erratic. "The bank is foreclosing on my house, the one you helped me put the down payment on. I missed the commercial balloon payment, and they cross-collateralized my personal mortgage. They sent the final notice of eviction yesterday. They're taking the house, Mom. Please. I know I messed up. I know I was awful to you, but I'm your son. Don't let them put me on the street. Please call the bank. You have the money in your trust. Just pay off the arrears. I'll pay you back, I swear. Please, Mom." Maggie lowered the letter. She looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the shimmering, icy blue waters of the lake. He still didn't understand. Even now, stripped of his wife, his company, and his pride, he still believed that his mother was an endless, unconditional ATM. He still believed that the title of son was a magic word that erased attempted extortion, elder abuse, and the profound cruelty of threatening a mother with a locked psychiatric ward. Maggie didn't cry. She didn't feel guilt. She simply reached for her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Mitchell Law," a crisp voice answered. "Chloe, it's Margaret." "Ah, Maggie. Good morning," Chloe Mitchell said, her tone warming slightly. "How are the watercolor classes going?" "They are wonderfully relaxing," Maggie smiled. "But I'm calling regarding business. I just received a rather pathetic piece of mail from my son. It seems he received his final notice of foreclosure." Chloe let out a short, dry chuckle. "Yes, I was wondering when he would get around to begging. I assume he wants the trust to bail him out of the mortgage?" "He does." Maggie traced the rim of her coffee mug with her index finger. "Tell me, Chloe, is all the paperwork officially finalized on our end?" "Signed, sealed, and legally ironclad," Chloe confirmed, the predatory edge returning to her voice. "As you requested 3 months ago, I set up the anonymous shell corporation, Tahoe Holdings, LLC. The moment luxury rental company defaulted, we approached his creditors. The banks were thrilled to offload his toxic debt. We purchased his defaulted commercial loans and the mortgage on his primary residence for pennies on the dollar." "So," Maggie said softly, her eyes tracking a lone eagle circling over the lake, "we are the bank." "We are," Chloe affirmed. "Tahoe Holdings, LLC is the sole owner of Tyler Sullivan's debt. We hold the deed to his house. The eviction notice he received yesterday didn't come from a faceless national bank, Maggie. It came from you. The deadline to vacate is Friday at 5 p.m. Would you like me to grant him an extension?" Maggie looked down at the letter on her table. She remembered the cold, arrogant sneer on Tyler's face when he had thrown the fake power of attorney at her. She remembered the terror she had felt when he threatened to lock her away in a memory care facility, stripping her of her dignity, her home, and her freedom. He had tried to take her sanctuary. so she took his. "No, Chloe," Maggie said, her voice steady and resolute. "No extensions. Execute the foreclosure on Friday. And if he isn't out of the house by 5:01 p.m., send the sheriff to physically remove him from the property. Let him learn what it actually means to build a life for himself, from the ground up, with nothing but his own 2 hands." "Understood," Chloe said. "I'll make the calls. Have a beautiful day, Margaret." "You too, Chloe." Maggie hung up the phone. She picked up Tyler's letter, walked over to the massive stone fireplace, and casually tossed the paper into the glowing embers. She watched for a moment as the edges curled, turned brown, and finally ignited, reducing his desperate manipulation to nothing but ash. Later that evening, Maggie stood on her wraparound deck, a glass of full-bodied Cabernet in her hand. The sun was setting, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant strokes of violet, amber, and deep, bruising purple. She took a deep breath of the cold mountain air. Society tells women, especially mothers, that our love must be a bottomless well. We are taught that to be a good mother means to forgive every transgression, to endure every disrespect, and to sacrifice our own peace on the altar of our children's comfort. We are expected to be the safety net that never breaks, even when the people falling into it are holding knives. But out here, in the quiet majesty of the mountains, Maggie had unlearned that toxic lie. She loved her son. She always would. The boy who used to scrape his knees and bring her dandelions was a cherished memory tucked safely in her heart. But the man he had become, the greedy, entitled stranger who had looked her in the eye and tried to destroy her, was not her responsibility anymore. Sometimes the most profound act of maternal love isn't catching your child when they fall. Sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping aside, letting them hit the ground, and forcing them to finally feel the weight of their own choices. She had spent 30 years protecting Tyler from the consequences of a harsh world. Now she was giving him the gift of accountability. It was the hardest, most agonizing decision of her life, but as she stood on her deck, surrounded by the empire she had built and the peace she had fiercely defended, she knew she had made the right choice. Family isn't just about blood. Blood is an accident of biology. True family is built on respect. It is built on care, on shared joy, and on the mutual agreement that you do not use the people who love you as stepping stones for your own greed. Maggie took a sip of her wine, smiling as the first stars began to prick through the twilight sky. She wasn't just a mother, a widow, or a retired CEO. She was Margaret Sullivan, and for the first time in her entire life, her home, her wealth, and her future belonged to no one but herself. Thank you so much for listening to Maggie's story. It is incredibly difficult to talk about the painful realities of family dynamics, especially when adult children cross the line from entitlement into emotional and financial abuse. So many women of our generation have sacrificed our dreams, our bodies, and our bank accounts to give our children everything, only to be made to feel like burdens when we finally reach our golden years. But Maggie's story is a reminder that it is never too late to draw a line in the sand. Your wealth, whether it's a massive estate or a modest pension, is yours. Your peace is yours. And you never have to tolerate disrespect just because it comes from someone who shares your DNA. Have you ever had to set a difficult, heartbreaking boundary with an adult child or an entitled family member? How did you find the strength to protect your own peace? Please share your stories in the comments below. This channel is a safe space for us to support, validate, and empower one another. We read every single comment, and your experiences truly matter. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, remember, you spent your whole life taking care of others. Now it's time to take care of yourself. Stay strong, stay protected, and I'll see you in the next video.